Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. There was a tense exchange in Parliament this week over a draft policy directive gazetted on 23 May relating to the use of equity-equivalent investment programs by licensed broadband providers. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss the matter. Hi, Terence.
No.
What is the background to the release of this draft directive?
Well, I think that Minister Malatsi is trying to accommodate what a GNU has been looking for, sort of growth in the sector, and a competition commission demand that there's more competition in the broadband and telecom sector. But this is a big history, and it was one of the managed liberalisation sectors. It was dominated by Telkom going back many, many years, and we've had a managed liberalisation agenda, and we've got an act, Electronic Communication Act, that really defines how we go about investing in the sector, as well as what the transformation demands are. So there's a view that in other sectors, many other sectors, but particularly the ICT sector, you already have equity equivalent programs as an option, as one of the avenues, rather than selling 30% shares in your company to black individuals or entities. You can go through an equity equivalent route. So it's not bypassing black empowerment, it's just a different avenue. So companies like Microsoft, IBM, Amazon in the ICT sector, Ford in the automotive sector, these are multinationals, particularly American multinationals, that don't really allow for a sale of shares in their entity itself. The sort of government over many years developed this other approach, this other avenue, to do many things around enterprise development, skills development, can be community development. So it's not direct ownership in your company in South Africa. It really does other transformation initiatives. There's also a different separate program underway at the DTRC where we've reviewed the black empowerment rules. We've included this equity equivalent, but we're also looking at setting up this transformation fund, which seeks to tap in as one of the sources equity equivalent programs. So there's a number of balls in the air, but specifically in the telecom sector, there's been a process since last year looking at whether the introduction of satellite service providers, Starlink being one of them, should be allowed to use this mechanism on other multinationals. And so ICAS has sort of applied its mind, and then the minister released this direction via Gazette, and it came in a week where we had just met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. So it seemed linked, and so I think that's what raised the many questions in Parliament this week.
Is this specifically to accommodate Elon Musk and Starlink?
Well, as I say, I think there was that definite link. I mean, you could only really draw that conclusion in some ways. Elon Musk has made it clear that he doesn't want to sell any equity in his company. He refuses to do that, and that he doesn't want to go through the normal route of selling 30% of his shares in Starlink, which is a SpaceX company, to a black empowerment entity. He doesn't want that. He feels there should be a different regime available. And we have got this alternative regime. Whether that will be satisfactory to Elon Musk is another, and Starlink is another matter entirely, whether they'll even use their equity equivalent program. Starlink is a good technology. It's one that many African countries are benefiting from at the moment, including a number of our neighbors in this region that are using Starlink. It does offer an opportunity to, in far-flung areas in particular, to offer a broadband, a sort of fast internet access to rural areas, rural communities, but also to communities where it's been difficult to have sort of a fibre penetration in South Africa. So there's the Starlink link. There's no doubt there's some Starlink link to this directive. The timing, just 2 days after we had that sort of Oval Office spat, I think also raised a lot of eyebrows. How did this happen so quickly? And whether the questions were also raised as to whether this had received cabinet approval or not. So there's a lot of background to this. There's method in some ways in what looks like madness, But the way it came about, I think, has raised the hackles of opposition parties. And we've seen that within the GNU, it's very, there are these differences. It really came to the fore during the budget process, where we saw there had to be 3 rounds before we could pass a budget. That's unprecedented in South Africa. And it really came down to not having your systems in place really for coalition management, governance. You need to manage those coalition arrangements so that by the time you make a statement or make a budget pronouncement or table something, you've got some backing, particularly within the cabinet. And it seems in this case that the minister hasn't really got that backing. There's been no sort of cabinet approval for this. That is mentioned in the medium-term development strategy, which is a GNU document, that we would look at this equity equivalent program, but it's quite vague as to what we mentioned there. So because this BE policy really falls under DTRC, that many felt that maybe that's where there should have been a lot more sort of a meeting of the minds before a direction was published in the Gazette.
What are some of the main objections and what is the likely outcome?
I think the key objections is ICASA being bypassed, which is the regulator, the economic regulator, because they've also had a process here in place. Is this the right instrument? Because we've got an act that basically stipulates what actually has to happen around BEE in the telecom sector. And I think the sort of the feeling is that, why not approach with an amendment? Why not come with the ECA and have a fully fledged amendment process? The other objection is, what does it mean for stakeholders and investors that are already in the sector? I think those are the 3 things. There's stakeholders and investors in the sector that have jumped through these hoops, that have met the criteria to get their licenses. And are we making a bespoke arrangement specifically for Starlink? Now that, there's a rebuffing of that sort of suggestion that this is sort of a instrument to align a BE policy and tactic and avenue that's already available to many other sectors, including the ICT sector, and align it with the ECA, the Electronic Communications Act. But I think the objection is that this is not the right way to go about it. They should have a legislative amendment where all the parties can have their say, where we can do this in a thoroughgoing way. So I think those are the key objections. What we must understand is this: that all the minister has done is published a draft Gazette notice. This is not a fait accompli, and I think he made that point clearly in Parliament in a very calm way as well, under huge pressure, that this is not a fait accompli, this is a process. 30 days to comment, you can make your comments. These objections are surely going to come, not just from lawmakers, but from the incumbents in the industry that have jumped through these empowerment hoops in the past. So he will then have to apply his mind to those objections or those recommendations and then decide what avenue. Is the direction yes? Is he 100% convinced that this is the most efficient and effective way to go? Then he will publish the direction. I think he'll need cabinet approval for that. And I don't think that's where he is at the moment. Or whether he has to take a step back in a sort of a case of less haste, more speed potentially, and present an amendment to the ECA, which I think would be sort of what many lawmakers are suggesting would have to happen. I think that ultimately I don't think the direction's going to fly as it is. There's too much opposition and it's quite organised to this. And we've seen that when the boot was on the other foot, there was no give around the budget. And I don't see a give from the other political parties. And it was across the board. It wasn't just the ANC objecting to this. So I think there's going to have to be something of a retreat and a going back to the drawing board in order to make progress. I don't think ultimately, there's this thing that it's about lessening empowerment. It's not. It's a different avenue to bring about transformation. And we've already got that avenue open to many other sectors. So it's not about reducing the empowerment or the transformation agenda in the telecom sector and the broadband services sector. It's about whether this avenue of empowerment should be open to those investors. And we'll have to see where it lands, but I think at the moment it looks very, very difficult to go the route that the Minister's gone.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis.